This is the weekend edition of Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, I'm always very excited about the weekend edition.
You are.
The weekday show is obviously about the news of the day, whereas on the weekend, it gets a little bit competitive, a little bit more free-flowing, a little bit fun, a little bit feisty at times.
Abusive, perhaps?
No. Yes, actually, that is completely fair, particularly when it comes to abusing our adjudicator,
Yes.
our Fear and Greed colleague Adam Lang, who I'll get to in just a second, because what we need him to do today is help us decide who out of the two of us has the biggest story of the week, the most remarkable story, the sleeper story, which is kind of one that's flying under the radar a little bit, and it's always a bit of a tricky category to try and pick something out that's not getting the attention that it deserves, and then our favourite story, and it is Adam's job. Who puts the best case forward? In most cases, he supports you, Sean. I'm hoping that today it changes. Adam, good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
Adam, did you notice the way Michael introduced you? It wasn't who picks the winner this week. He said, who puts the best case forward?
A slight and subtle change, but a significant one, isn't it?
Absolutely. If you've been listening to the show, for weeks and weeks, you'll understand that Michael sort of just subtly changes his bent at times.
Yeah, the intonation, a little change.
Unlike the Reserve Bank, you need to pay very close attention to the wording just to see what might have potentially changed.
You're about as interesting as the Reserve Bank.
Oh, that is savage. The abuse, Sean. It's getting started early. Look, okay, we will get into the biggest story of the week, but we've had a lot of debate over this previously and the right way to do this. And I think that we should agree between us that the biggest story of the week is the economy. And then we're going to pick another bigger story each.
What an excellent idea. Well, that's left field. Who would have thought of that for the last 2 or 3 weeks?
Okay, I mean, that sounds like you're being narky out of context. I mean, you're being narky in context as well. But the fact is that this came about because we had a listener intervene. Joseph was his name, who said, look, every week it's always the economy. Can you pick something else? Just agree the economy is the biggest and pick something else. And we said, Joseph, that's a great idea. And then Sean just completely just ignored that and went for the economy again. So I did the same the following week. Anyway, we've played dirty over the last few weeks. Let's go clean this week.
So
Sean.
Even that explanation is totally dirty because I was inadvertent. I mean, unlike my comrade, Michael, I will again be fighting cleanly this week.
Bull plop. just do it. Just do it. Let's see what
of course, the biggest story was Reserve Bank's decision to not lift interest rates. But that's not my entry. Plus, my editor at the Financial Review, a guy called Glenn Burge, one of the, a truly great editor of the Financial Review, always used to say, you can't have a big story when something didn't happen. And he kind of has a point.
That is very good, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. But ultimately, for me, the biggest story of the week was ratings agency Fitch's decision to cut the US sovereign debt rating to AA plus from AAA. Now, why? Well, excellent question that I asked myself. Basically, the decision sent a signal that the US economy isn't doing that well, and that made investors run for cover. We saw that in markets with equities tumbling on Wall Street and locally, particularly the tech stocks. The Aussie dollar fell back towards 65 US cents, the lowest level since March. Now remember, the greenback is the reserve currency for the world, so that's where people go when they're worried about the outlook. And what Fitch did this week made people worried about the outlook. Ratings agencies have great power. More than 10 years ago, S&P downgraded the US debt to AA+. Moody's still has a AAA rating on it. While Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said the decision was basically outdated, it still means the US will have to pay more for its debt, and the rest of us are paying for it as well via weaker markets. Big story. Michael.
That is a big story. So it was shorter than I was expecting. Usually when you settle into the bigger story of the week, we can just lean back for a moment, take a sip of coffee and just wait. Actually caught me mid-mouthful then, Sean. So
sorry about that.
That's all right. Look, big story. I'm going to be... Well, no, I'm going to admit I did play a little bit dirty last week. I lost that.
Oh, that's funny. You didn't say that last week.
The fact is, though, I've also played clean. And I lost then as well. So this week, I'm just going to let the stories do the talking because they don't need me They don't need me to help them win. Focusing on the stories that matter to the people, right? And this week, those stories were all in politics. It was a big week.
Oh, the people love politics, there's no doubt about it.
Well, the people are politics, Sean. You don't have politics without people. Parliament sitting again after the midwinter break. And out of everything that happened, a lot happened this week, a huge amount, but I have done you a service. I have gone through it in a great amount of detail, and I have distilled it all down to 3 things that you need to know.
3
about
stories
politics this week. No, 3 things. There was one story, 3 things, 3 subparts of one story. Number 1, the government reintroduced legislation to set up the $10 billion, that's a lot of money, Housing Australia Future Fund. This is primarily about building affordable housing, tens of thousands of properties, but the Greens want Labor to spend more. They want a rent freeze. Now, the thing is, if this legislation doesn't pass, it will provide the government with a trigger for a double dissolution election. And that is why this story is so important, because we've got the Prime Minister saying that we won't be going to the polls this year. But who knows about 2024? Imagine that, another election, not even 2 years since the last. I don't know whether anyone's ready for another election just yet. That was a big part of the story this week. I'm not saying it was an individual story. Item number 2, the second subsection of this one story called politics. The Albanese government facing its first industrial dispute by federal workers. How about this? You've got public sector unions protesting against a 10.5% offer over 3 years. They want 20%. And also unhappy about the rejection of a 4-day work week trial, which I know that some people here, potentially those in a position to decide whether I win or not, consider 4-day work weeks to be a worthy thing of trialling. So look, no judgments on this at all, but let's just see how the government handles this one. And finally, item number 3 in this trident of news stories, and probably actually the biggest in terms of economic impact. And in hindsight, I probably should have opened with this one. I'm pretty sure there's a news kind of principle, Sean, of kind of leading with the lead story. But anyway, this is item number 3. It is a subcategory part here. Canberra has had some major news through from China, and that is that China is going to remove the 80% tariffs on Australian barley exports. So this is big, big news for our economy, because this was costing Australia a lot of money, about $1 billion a year, I believe. And it was been about 3 years, I think, that these tariffs have been in place when Beijing put kind of crippling tariffs on a whole range of different products. But since the election last year, there's been plenty of goodwill between China and Australia, a lot of talks between our Trade Minister, Don Farrell, and his counterpart, and they've been reviewing the decision. And late this week, we heard the good news that decision was going to be reversed, and it was going to happen quickly, and that 80.5% tariff was going to be lifted pretty much straight away. This is good news, obviously, for the economy. It is also potentially a very good sign, you would say, for the other sectors that are still subject to those restrictions. Barley today, maybe wine tomorrow, maybe lobsters next week. We will see. Anyway, put it all together. They are 3 components of one bigger story, which is a big, big week in politics. But I've simplified it down to 3 key items, and that's all you need to know. Adam.
Okay, 3 key items, but it took a while to get through them all, didn't it, Michael?
It took
4 minutes, 1 second. Literally. I've timed it. I've got the timer on from the time Michael started talking. Yeah, I mentioned Glenn Burge, the editor. You know, it's not a story because nothing happened. So we've got what have we got, Michael? We've got the double dissolution, which might happen. We've got the pay dispute, which might happen, and barley. Anyway, go on.
I'm just going to let this all roll off me, because really nothing you say can affect me. What Adam says can affect me greatly. Yeah. And hopefully, Adam, you're also immune to this.
So I've given 5 points to each of the following criteria: topicality, timeliness, economic impact, subjective bias, and melodrama. So each of you are going to be awarded a score out of 25.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Sean, it's a ripper of a story, and very significant, and it will have impact probably for some time. I've given you 23. Now,
Whoa,
Michael.
Big.
Yeah, big score. So, Michael, Very heavy on the melodrama, particularly at the end there.
I thought I went a bit light on the melodrama.
Which just brought you home to 24 points. So you win for this biggest story of the week.
You must be joking. Oh, my God.
This is
Travesty.
This is a delightfully unexpected result.
Now, here's the reasons why. Well, I'll give you very brief reasons why.
Well, can you give me 3 sub-reasons?
The 10 billion housing fund is a good initiative, but it's not nearly enough. Public sector unions going for wage increases. Of course, this was going to happen. That's got a way to play out, and it's significant. Everyone cares about how our taxpayer money is being spent. And these tariffs out of China, that is a roaring great story for Australia.
Yeah, that's it. And I'm taking notes because I hadn't thought about kind of really pursuing the taxpayer dollars, how is this being spent. I'm like, oh, that's a nice angle. Thanks for adding it in, Adam.
I think on subjective bias, you got 10 out of 5.
That's very good.
Let's move on to the most remarkable story of the week. Michael, tell me, what's yours?
Most remarkable. Well, I think I can speak for all of us when I say that we love a good Aussie success story here at Fear and Greed, a story of entrepreneurs getting in and having a crack and then tanning that crack as well.
Oh, dear. Go on. I know where you're going now.
I'm talking, of course, about Bondi Sands, the skincare and tanning products brand that sold this week.
Go on. Keep going. You said it.
For around $450 million to Japanese beauty group KO Corporation. Now, the thing I love about this story is that the company is only 11 years old.
That's a lot of crack turning, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. I mean, it's, like if you were to kind of break that down, which we're not going to.
No,
actually.
let's not. Just move on. Move on.
I think we'll move on very maturely here. I just think that's incredible growth for a little Aussie business, 11 years old, to be sold for $450 million. That kind of growth, and it's not a tech company either. That's kind of typically where you'd see that kind of thing. Amazing. It's got 3 men each owning a third of the business. So I'd say that's a pretty profitable decade for them. The business is fast growing in the US, it's fast growing in the UK, and isn't using the Bondi name such a good marketing move in terms of the way that plays overseas. And as Sean told us this week, the fact that they survived their first batch at all is pretty remarkable in itself, considering way back in 2012, that batch turned people green and they had to recall it. I've since done a little bit of research. I spent quite a bit of time Googling fake tans and why it goes green. And apparently it still looks green when it goes on the Bondi Sands product, but it's because they use a green undertone to prevent that kind of really orangey pigment issue that other ones have, and it's almost something that they have that sets them apart from others. Clearly, in that first batch, it then didn't rub off, and they stayed green. But they've clearly fixed it since then. Isn't that interesting? Maybe not so interesting, but the scale: $450 million. What a brilliant success story! Well done, Australia, and well done to those guys.
And a remarkable story. So the point is, excellent story. I do love that story, and I love the way you told it. Certainly melodrama, but mine doesn't need mama drama. Mine doesn't need melodrama. Mine is all about the most remarkable thing this week: women's sport, specifically women's football. The Matildas game on Monday night smashed all ratings records with more than 2 million viewers watching a female sports match for the first time. More than 2.4 million Australians watched the game on Channel 7 and its online video service 7+. Of course, the Matildas won 4-0. They're up against the Dangerous Danes on Monday night in Sydney. Go the Matildas. Monday's performance well and truly beat the other major sporting event, the final men's Ashes test shown on 9. I think that in itself is kind of interesting. Total reach, defined as anyone who watches 1 minute of content on television or 15 seconds online, which as parameters are sort of slightly dodged anyway. But total reach was 4.7 million people. So 4.7 million people at some point tuned in to see what the Australian women's soccer team was doing. It's Seven's most watched program so far in 2023. Reckon this is one of the great lessons in marketing. Have a really good product, the Matildas. Sell the bejeebers out of it. It has been everywhere, and create a market. I don't reckon 2 or 3 years ago there was a market for women's soccer in Australia. Well, this World Cup, the fact that we have Sam Kerr, who hasn't played a game yet, irrelevant, but we have a great team who are competitive and, incredible marketing. Wow. Go the Matildas. Most remarkable story of the week. Adam.
So difficult. For me, this one comes down to a fantastic story versus a really important story. I love it that we can build a brand here called Bondi Sands and 11 years later just demonstrate that it's worthy to the whole world. I think that's awesome. But on this occasion, Sean, I've got to give it to you for women's sport and the importance of what this does for sport in general, not just women's sport or women's football. But what a great symbol it is when all these ratings and all these fantastic crowds are showing up to great games of sport. I think it's just wonderful. So I have to give this one to you.
Thank you very much. It's always a worry when Adam starts talking about you first because you think, no, I'm gone.
Yeah, you try and read
mix
into
it up.
You're like, oh, yeah. And on occasion, you do mix it up. And it keeps us guessing, just like the criteria for the overall judging. Like, you just keep changing things up. But you know what? That's fine. No, this is good. What are we? 1-1.
We are 1-1.
This is exciting. We are heading into halftime now. We'll come back.
This is like a Matildas game. 1-1 at halftime. Or who's going to be the winner?
Well, it is likely going to be me. We'll come back in a moment with the sleeper story of the week, which I say I'm going to win, but the sleeper story is always my worst category. So join us after the break for disaster.
Believe, Michael. You can do it.
Cheers. Thanks, Ted Lasso. All right, we are looking for the sleeper story of the week. So this is a story that's maybe flying under the radar a little bit. It is potentially a story that's not getting the attention that one of us thinks it deserves. Sean, you're always good at picking these stories. What did you find this week?
Well, take a little bit of explanation, nothing like yours, but off we go. We have this economy that's stumbling along. We really saw that this week in retail trade figures that showed 3 successive quarters of negative retail sales. Retail recession, I believe our Judge Adam called it. First time that's happened since 2008. First time in more than 30 years that sales in a quarter were lower than a year earlier. We have high interest rates. We have cost of living pressures out the proverbial wazoo. We also heard from the banks this week that the competition in the mortgage market is over. So that's the background. That's the context.
Oh.
Yet this week, Credit Corp came out and said its net profit fell 5% last year. Why? Because I keep saying why in the middle of my stories. I don't know why. Anyway, its net profit fell 5% last year because people are paying their bills. That's somewhat surprising given how much higher interest rates are and all those issues I just mentioned. Credit Corp basically buys books of distressed assets, mostly credit cards and personal loans. They buy them off the banks. They buy it at a very discounted price, and then they do their best to collect it, and they collect more than they pay, and that's their margin. But business just isn't very good, with the company saying the savings buffer built up during the COVID pandemic has helped consumers. Others have used early access to superannuation to pay down loans. We keep talking about this fiscal cliff. We're all going to fall off it at some point. Well, maybe there won't be a thud at it. Maybe it's just not quite as bad as it seems. Given we've been talking about this for a long time, this could be a massive sleeper story. Hopefully that's the case. We actually hear from the country's biggest lender, Commonwealth Bank, this coming week in its earnings results. So that'll give us a little more insight into it. But it's just something to keep an eye on. A great sleeper story. Michael.
That is a good story, Sean. My favourite part is, well, 2 parts of that was your theatre of the mind, the painting of that picture of the fiscal cliff with the thud at the bottom of it. And also the way you have been asking yourself why in all of your stories. It feels like you are kind of just getting closer and closer to the politician kind of status of asking yourself the question and answering it yourself. And so,
or totally unsure of what I'm talking about. One or the other.
You're actually questioning yourself as you go, questioning your own conviction. Now, my sleeper story, I'm being genuine when I say this, that I think I have found a winner this week, because this is a true sleeper story, a major milestone in this country, and it didn't get much attention. So this week, we learned that Melbourne has overtaken Sydney to become the country's biggest hotel market for the first time. A couple of details, I won't go into as much kind of background as Sean did. Before the pandemic, Sydney had 21,634 hotel rooms.
That's fairly detailed, isn't it?
Oh, no, well, there's really not much more than that. That's basically it. You did about, 4.5 minutes of detail. So 21,634 hotel rooms. Melbourne had just 37 less than that. So that is pretty remarkable that they were that close in the first place. But since then, 21 new hotels have opened in Melbourne compared to just 13 in Sydney. 5,000 more rooms compared to 2,200, and there's still more to come. So, with Melbourne already laying claim to being the sporting capital of Australia and the cultural capital of Australia, this week, Sydney surrendered its claim to being the tourist capital of Australia and the conference capital and anything else you need a hotel for. Because if you want to get a room, there are 3,100 extra opportunities now to do that in Melbourne. And assuming that each room, say, costs, let's say $250, just for a nice round figure, there's going to be a lot that are way, way, way more expensive than that. But that's an extra $775,000 every night in Melbourne. That's just based on the surplus of hotel rooms. Add on other spending, say $100. That's an extra $1 million injected into the Melbourne economy every day. Across the year, that's a $400 million advantage over Sydney. Nobody's talking about this. It is a sleeper story, and I should win this just for the maths alone.
I totally agree. I totally agree with that, because you said $1 million a day over the year, 400 million, and I have no idea how you got 365 times 1 to equal 400 million.
I was rounding down for simplicity. Sean, this is the problem. When you're dealing with a nitpicker, you are going to pick every little nit you can find. And I was just rounding down. I can do it more specifically and just go exactly if you want. But you know what? The theatre is what counts here. It is $400 million. It's actually probably a little bit over $400 million. But I'm speechless. Actually, Adam, please confirm what I suspect, that I have found a ripper of a sleeper story this week, and I deserve this win.
Okay. So, Michael, you have found a ripper of a sleeper story.
Oh, dear, he's doing me first.
Unfortunately, it's not as good as Sean's. So, where it fell short for me was really on the economic impact on it, because the fiscal...
I did maths. I explained the economic impact.
Maths alone won't get you there.
$400 million. I gave you a specific sum of how much the economic impact was.
Well, allow me to use that then for exactly why I couldn't give you the sleeper story this week, because the fiscal impact of the cliff that we were going to have, if we can avoid that, the fiscal impact is far, far greater. It is remarkable to me, and that Melbourne for so long has been so good at events and hospitality, and it's taken the lead off Sydney. That is a big story. And Sydney, you look around Sydney at the moment, it is a construction site in so many parts of the city because of the things we haven't done in the past that we really need to catch up on in Sydney. So Melbourne's taken the lead, and it'll take a while to get back. It's a great story. But on this one, there's greater economic impact. If this retail recession, if high interest rates, cost of living, if we can avoid this fiscal cliff, that's a massive story. And so I have to give that to Sean this week.
Mm-hmm.
What about the melodrama? Sean had no melodrama.
As you said at your very, very top story, in fact, if I could remember the words, we'll talk about the biggest story.
Can.
I'm just letting the stories do the talking. That's what you said.
Fine.
Anyway.
Okay. All right. 2-1. Sean, you're up. Now, what are we on? Favourite story. Do I go first on this one? I think I do.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, I'm going to finish on a simple story.
No doubt.
Clearly, the maths in that one was far too
sounding
advanced.
enormously confident just yet, Michael. Come on, get off the canvas.
I'm saying that I suspect. No, I'm confident. I'm saying I'm just going to go simple for my last one because clearly the maths in my last one was too advanced for my colleagues here.
365 times 1.
It wasn't exactly $1 million. It is rounding down, Sean. Goodness me. Okay. Favorite story of the week. we need to talk about shrinkage, okay?
It's a good start.
I don't know why I'm laughing. There is no reason to laugh here. But I'm with you. I actually do want to talk about it. Go on. It's a serious issue.
It is. It is indeed. Though, Sean, unfortunately for you, this is not about the shrinkage you'd like to speak about. This is the shrinkage of the average workday. This is the fact that, according to a new study, the average workday has gotten 37 minutes shorter in the last year. 37 minutes. That is a huge decrease in just 1 year. And I could calculate out how many minutes that would be across the year, but I would probably get pulled up for rounding it down or rounding it up. Not that I'm bitter. There are fewer people doing overtime shifts as well. The thing is, though, and this is why this is so important, this was such a big study. It examined 38 million hours worked by more than 134,000 employees around the world, right? And while our days are getting shorter, we're still producing the same output. And that's the part that makes it my favourite story. Without any drama, without any unnecessary embellishment, without any kind of melodramatic flair, the fact is that we are working less time, but we are still meeting our objectives. We're still getting the work done with no drop in productivity. And you know what this means, right? That if we take this just a little bit further here, the potential is quite extraordinary. The workday shrinks by 37 minutes. Next step, just lop off for one whole day entirely. And if the data holds up, as I suspect it might, although I have nothing to back that up because clearly the data and the facts kind of...
Go on. I'm with you. I support.
We will be able to get 5 days of output into just 4 days. Is anybody here with me? Adam, you're with me. I know you are. I can see it. You want to, but you don't want to give me the satisfaction yet of knowing that I've won before Sean's even done his story. So that's my story. No drama, no flair, just the facts. Sean, it's yours. What have you got?
I'm exhausted listening to that. This story is my favourite because it's about turning back the tide, doing the impossible, beating the odds. Yes, stopping your kids from being on their smartphone all day, every day. So China's Internet Overseer, the Cyberspace Administration of China, has announced new regulations which are some of the harshest restrictions on internet use in the world. Non-adult children. So that is someone under the age of 18, but I don't know why you have to call them non-adult children. They won't be allowed to access the internet from mobile devices from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. Kids between the ages of 16 and 18, they are allowed a maximum of 2 hours mobile usage. Can you imagine that? Get me just down to 2 hours a day. Ridiculous. No idea how regulators are going to enforce the proposed ban. Maybe mobile carriers, the fact that they require real name registration will help. I just love the fact that Beijing is taking on what parents around the world have tried and failed at. Good luck to them. Adam.
Okay. Really interesting. So given that phones have a battery, isn't it going to be awfully hard to police that?
Oh, totally. How do you do it?
Vexing issue in so many ways.
Yes, vexing. Is that a category in the judging?
It hasn't been.
Vexation?
But me as a parent, it's a vexing challenge.
Totally.
Right?
Oh, impossible.
So
I actually find if you can get them in the car and they're sitting in the seat next to you and you can kind of talk to them, it's about the only time that you can get them off their phones. Even then, often they're on their phones and you've got to tell them to get off their phones. Vexing.
I think, it's kind of anything short of confiscation seems to have its limits, right? So
that's World War III.
It could be. So it's a ripper of a favourite story. I don't see how it can be applied. And so I'm going to give this week's win to Michael on my favourite story of the week. Now, without being incredibly tedious, which you both know I can be.
Wow. When you're actually starting with that, boy.
What an opening, eh?
Guys, if you listeners, if you want to grab a cup of tea, probably now's the time.
I've only just got a very brief thing to say, and that is productivity in this nation is a desperate worry. So shrinkage of the average workday.
Anti-shrinkage, I think it is.
I am anti-shrinkage, yes. But if it wasn't for population growth, our economy would be shrinking. We are doing nothing to grow pound for pound. And so I see the issues of productivity as really, really important. And so that's why it's my favourite story of the week. Well done, Michael.
Oh, thank you, Adam. Thank you. Well, that means it's 2-2, which means it goes to the points. And now, because Adam, you're giving each kind of story 5 points for this and 5 points for that, and out of a potential 25 points, is it, for each category?
Yes, it is, Michael.
So that means that there should be a clear winner. I'm trying to give you a bit of time to add this up.
Yeah, that's right. I hope we're not going to get Adam's score for each story broken down to 5 for each of us.
Do you remember The Vicar of Dibley?
No, vaguely.
Do you remember Frank? I think it is.
Yeah, I've never watched it.
Adam, you remember Frank, right?
I do remember Frank.
That this feels like it's got the rich potential for Frank to come out and just do, in the first category, I gave 5 points out of a possible 5 for melodrama for Sean.
Like a Brownlow medal count.
And we could work our way through it. But anyway, put us out of our misery.
Okay.
What was the margin?
So, Michael, obviously it's 2 stories each. Great battle. Sean, 92 points. Michael, I think this is a PB, 95 points.
Oh, my
well
God. Oh,
The shrinkage story did it.
I'm a little overwhelmed right now.
I don't know what to say.
I've gone a bit trembly.
Thank your parents. Always thank your parents.
Just in shock.
Oh, I'm not thanking anybody else because this was all me. Isn't that the spirit? Isn't that what you're supposed to do in this kind of scenario?
Yeah,
Look,
absolutely.
that was a good battle. Thank you very much, Adam. Good judging today.
Thank you, Michael.
And thank you, Sean.
I'm throwing my toys out of the cot. I'm not going to come back for the next couple of weekends.
In fact, you're going to go overseas just to do so.
Yes, of course, Jen Duke will be in next week. That's exciting.
Yes, yeah, very exciting. And we'll look forward to being joined by Jen. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And Sean, while you're away, because you are taking a nice little trip, would you mind sending us a photo or two, and we might pop them up on our Instagram?
So where I'm going, one of my sons is moving overseas to go to college, and I'm really hoping in that first week, orientation week, so I'm just going with him to drop him off, there's going to be a frat party. So I am really
You're not
really
invited,
hoping
Sean.
that I'm at the chug, chug, chug type style on the table at the frat party. And if that's the case, I'll certainly send you a photo.
Oh, please. We want video. Though it does have those, it does remind me a little bit of schoolies. And remember how then you have like the 35-year-olds turning up to schoolies. And what do they call them? I think they call them
toolies.
Toolies, exactly.
Yeah, okay. I won't be going there.
You and the other parents can congregate elsewhere.
All right, time to wrap this up. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great weekend.